I'm Alex Lockridge, and this is a conversation with First Baptist Church. Today we are joined with someone you are probably familiar with, as he's been a lifelong Moorhead native, and he's left quite a mark here. J.D. Reeder, we are so thankful that you would join us, and we'd like to invite you by starting telling us about life here in Moorhead and however long that's been and what it was like.
Well, for me, living in Moorhead began in 1946. I was born in Lexington at the beginning of the baby boom following World War II, but after a few weeks we located here, and I've been here for the rest of the entire time since then. I grew up in the 1950s and 60s when Moorhead was a very good place to live. It was typical small town America with all of the good things that implies.
Well, good. So tell us about what you did for a living here.
Well, I was, after my time at the university, I was a teacher, and I did 28 years of that, 14 years at Moorhead State University. Most of that time I was at the laboratory school that was operated by the College of Education, Breckenridge School. It inhabited the building that is now known as Breckenridge Hall. I taught English there primarily. Occasionally I was loaned out to other departments to teach other things. A graduate course in the history and philosophy of education for that college, and the occasional other guest gig in other courses here and there, but mostly I was at Breckenridge School. And I was offered a position with the Rowan County Schools, which I took, and I spent another 14 years with them and retired after 28 years as a teacher and administrator in 1996.
Great. Well, I feel confident in speaking for a lot of people and saying that you are a wealth of knowledge, and that knowledge has taken you well into your retirement, and you found ways to utilize that wealth of knowledge. So tell us a little bit about how you've spent your retirement, one that I presume has been enjoyable for you.
Indeed it has. I have enjoyed my retirement. I was able to retire at the age of 50. And at that point, with 28 years of experience in public education, I decided it was time for other people to have that experience too. I had projects in mind that I wanted to work on, so I was not retiring to a life of idleness. In fact, I probably have been busier since I've been retired than I ever was while I was working.
Well, tell us about your segment with MSPR. Most people probably know you from that, but maybe not everyone.
Yes, I credit my friend Drew Henderson with my getting this opportunity with Moorhead State Public Radio. Some years ago, they used to run a feature done by Garrison Keillor called The Writer's Almanac. And after a time, Keillor began to move into retirement himself. His Writer's Almanac feature became unaffordable, really, for Moorhead State Public Radio to continue, and Drew suggested to the management there, notably Paul Hitchcock, that I might be interested in developing a feature that would be similar to that. So we talked about the idea. I was interested. I did a sample. They liked it and decided, let's wait about 3 months to let the other one phase out, and then we'll bring you on board. And so the Reader's Notebook was born as a replacement for the Writer's Almanac. We're now in the 6th year of that. I had no idea it would last this long. Not too long ago, we completed the 1200th episode of the Reader's Notebook.
We're all glad to hear that. One other interest I want you to speak a little bit about is your mark on the theater world in Moorhead.
Well, that's another big part of my post-active working life. When the Community Theater Organization was founded here in 1989, and their first year with a series of productions was 1990, I was asked if I was interested in being involved, and I said, indeed I am, but this job I have is such that I can't really consider anything like that as long as I'm actively employed as a school administrator by that time. I said, you wait until I get retired and then you won't be able to get rid of them. Later on was a week later, and they called me and they said, we really, really would like for you to do this little part. And I said, well, what little part is it? They said, you're familiar with the play? Yes, I am. You know the rabbi? I said, oh yeah, that's a sweet little, a lot of fun. And since then, the Theater Guild has now done 100 productions, and I've been involved in now more than half of them in one capacity or another.
That is wonderful. Well, changing directions a little, one of the very interesting pieces that we are doing with this interview series is learning about our individuals' faith and the journeys that they've been on with their faith. So if you could tell us a little bit about where your faith began and the people who may have influenced that journey at the beginning.
I'm very glad to do that. My faith experiences began in very early childhood. I credit my parents and my grandparents with a very strong sense of directing me toward faith experiences. I was in church from the time I can remember anything. One set of grandparents led me in a very interesting direction in that grandfather was an electrician in a small eastern Kentucky town. He did other work too, but electrician work was what gave him a lot of church contacts. He felt called to a ministry in which he would visit little country churches, the typical little white frame building with often 2 doors on the front, none of which were wired for electricity in the late 40s and early 50s. And he'd go to the nearest house and ask, do you go to church up here? And if the answer was yes, he would say, well, who would I talk to about getting electricity in the church for these folks? Well, you can talk to me, or you can talk to the fellow who lives the next house up, or whatever. And he would explain that that's what he would like to do. And often the response was, well, we can't afford that. And his answer was, well, I didn't ask you if you could afford it. I asked you if you wanted it. The other grandfather on the other side was a devoted student of the Bible all his life. And he felt a need to share what he had learned. And I was often his audience. So when I visited with him, I just knew it was time to get comfortable because Grandpa was going to hold forth. And he'd pick something and he would take me through it, and it was remarkable. It was wonderful. And then there came the day when another good friend, a different good friend, invited me to Moorhead First Baptist Church's Invite a Friend to Church Sunday. And she said, would you consider doing that? And I said, sure. I'd be glad to come. And I did, and I found that there were other folks who were visiting here that Sunday from other churches in the community, including a lady from the Methodist Church. And we looked at each other and laughed and said, what are we doing here? Well, that was the beginning of what has now been more than a dozen years of wonderful association with First Baptist Church. I married the good friend who invited me to come. And I'm very happy here.
I had a suspicion Diana was that good friend.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Well, the natural question then is, you've been here about 12 years. Why are you here? What is it about First Baptist that makes this home for you?
I think First Baptist's outlook on how a spiritual life can be expressed and well lived very much appeals to me. There's a real sense of community here. All sorts of different perspectives, different attitudes, different approaches to one's spiritual experience, that's presented in a very inclusive manner with no lockstep, it must be this way or no way approach to all of it. I like the fact that it's possible to have a conversation with folks and not necessarily agree on everything, but still remain civil and convivial and work through these things together.
Your response may serve as a natural lead-in to this next question. If you meet someone who is entirely unfamiliar with our church or congregation, what kind of words will you use to describe this church to them?
I would say welcoming, inclusive, a place where different points of view are encouraged.
Good. I think we pride ourselves on all those things. Last thing I want to ask, and this might be a more difficult question for you, being a lifelong Moorhead native and serving in certain capacities that would make you widely known to so many people here, but is there something about you, something interesting that most people might not know about you?
Well, one of the things that I might say in response to that, the first job that I ever had as a youngster was working as a clerk in a little general store that was operated by my grandfather. Now, this is the grandfather who shared with me his exhaustive knowledge of the Bible on every occasion possible. From the time I was about 12 years old until I was almost through high school, I worked for him in that little store on Saturdays, sometimes after school during the school year and during the summertime. He paid me the munificent sum of 37.5 cents an hour. I don't know quite how he came up with the 37.5. I just know that after 2 hours of work, I'd qualified for 75 cents.
Well, it's been fun listening to your story. I've learned quite a lot of new things about you, and I hope others have too. So thank you for inviting us into your story, and thank you for inviting others into the story of First Baptist Church.
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you today, and thank you for asking me.
This was J.D. Reeder, and this was a conversation with First Baptist Church. I'm Alex Lockridge.